Hello everyone, can you hear me? Been a little bit. Hope you guys are doing okay. It's been a little hectic for me lately, but I'm excited to be able to look at everything again, actually do some stuff. Oh, I'm watching myself. Yeah, I'm sure I'll warm up into it, but I am just a little, I don't know, the move has been a lot. Moved, Father's Day was yesterday, it was really nice sharing it with my family. Yeah, so let's talk about Krasnacht. Krasnacht, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it. Paulina, hi, I'm doing okay. Just a little worn out, but I'll be okay. I'm excited to get back into this timeline because the sort of things that I was doing, the sort of ideas I was coming up with is starting to get really interesting. I think I have notes here that I'm gonna try to read from. I'm sure I'll remember it too, but yeah, so a little bit of backstory about Krasnacht. It was, I think, the actual first Kaiserreich Cold War idea mod thing. I don't have this exact image. This is my, like, thumbnail. Hold on, I could probably make the canvas really big. Yeah, hold on. I'll just do 3,000. Okay, it's not the best, but you can see it better here. Yeah, no problem, Paulina. I appreciate you coming in on the streams and on the premieres. It's nice to see you. Turn the music off? Oh, okay. This music may be a little loud. I kind of like, I like listening to music, but I'll find something quieter for you here. This is the one I usually listen to. If you guys don't know, this is a old school RuneScape. It's a game that me and my lore mom love to play with each other. She's actually in the room with me right now. I used to have an office. I don't have it set up in my new place yet, so she's letting me borrow her desk for this. So thank you. Has Loreboy given you a present? Yeah, they got me a card. In fact, Lore Girl made a little shirt card here with glitter glue, the red bow tie, and a blue collared shirt. Yeah, so it was good. Hi, Novo. So, okay, let's get back to Krasnacht. So it was basically the Third Internationale beats Germany with the help of nationalist Russia. And this was so old. It was when Russia had all those paths that you basically just did a really easy checklist to go down and do. So there wasn't that much depth to Savinkov as there is now, so that gives us a really big advantage when we're republishing it. The mod was never published. There was a bunch of teasers and I think a bunch of different leadership changes that caused it to kind of peter out. I'll try to do a better investigation when I make the video itself. I don't want to make any wild claims about why the mod died or what the problem was. I have some ideas now, but it would be irresponsible just to share them. But the one thing I will say is that because it's Kaiserreich has such a really good Twilight Struggle. A Twilight Struggle is a different Kaiserreich Cold War. It's kind of like Kampf gegen Barbarei, the other Loregrave video I did. it's like the successor to it. It's not the exact same, but it's the same idea. So there's Twilight Struggle, there's Kalterkrieg, which released... Kalterkrieg started development after Krasnacht, for example. But yeah, so Krasnacht, it's like the Americans beat the Entente, the socialist Europeans beat Germany with the help of Russia. The problem is that, like, now they're having a Cold War over it. This Austrian state here is actually like Cisleithania. It's like the Austrian crown territories, but a socialist republic, which is crazy. And then they have it split between themselves and Czechoslovakia. I don't know what happened with Bulgaria and Serbia and stuff. We can change this a lot, and I think I have actually changed it a lot compared to where it goes. The Cairo Pact one, that you can even see, this is before Syria, the Syrian revolt became a thing. The thing about Japan, I think Japan like does okay, but then China's still together, so they're gonna have a fight. I want to change that too. Western Australia, that's really cool. I have nothing about it though. And then I think this is the last remnants of the monarchy, or at least this is just where Queen Elizabeth is, and that's pretty cute. I want to keep that. The Entente remnants are in Africa itself, and they're going to have many a fight with anti-colonialists. I'm not sure how much the Cairo Pact would be involved, but I'm sure the Third International would have a vested interest in destroying the old regimes, even if they only have a very small amount of legitimacy. Why does Canada still have Alaska? I was a part of Krasnacht for a very short amount of time, and I saw a debate happening between people who said that it should be American and it should be Canadian. The idea is that Alaska itself is a imperialist claim by the United States, so the communist United States wouldn't claim an imperialist territory. So then it should go to the nearest administrative sector, which is Canada. But then there were people who were like, well, why would Canada get rewarded for it? And it's like, well, it doesn't matter. They're going to become a part of the union anyway. At one point, somebody like mass deleted the entire argument, quote unquote, just because they felt like it. Yeah, so it was quite a thing to be there for, and that's one of the reasons why I left. I was just like, it's a lot of drama there, and I don't know. No offense to any of the people who actually worked on this thing. It's a really interesting work of art. The iconography and all, like even the logo itself, like it's so beautiful. I know that it's like, oh, it's based off of white Russian propaganda, but like, come on, like you can't just make everything out of thin air. They added the syndicalist banner, they added the Frost March thing. Like, it's so beautiful, right? Why is Czechoslovakia split that stupidly? Yeah, we'll get into this, but like the idea I think was that they just split Europe down the middle. I think that's even included here. I think this is a socialist republic of Yugoslavia, and this is just Serbia, and they're aligned here. And remember, like, this is way before any of the content. I think this is even before the Central American unification content was included in Kaiserreich. Like, this is extremely old, like very old stuff. So it doesn't follow new Kaiserreich lore. The pale horse slayed the red dragon. Yeah, I mean, there's gonna be a lot of that propaganda, so that's gonna be interesting. Yeah, because I'd say I'm warmed up now. I'm yapping proficiently. So let's take a look at what I got here. So this is really cool. This is the logo for the INTFOR. It's like the International Socialist Forces or something, and then it's supposed to be the Americans and the Communist Europeans, or Socialist Europeans. Sorry, excuse me. And then there's the Russians here, and they have taken over Eastern Europe. So I need to pull up my notes just so that I don't misspeak, because there's some things here that I think, let's see. I have notes. I have a notes layer here. Okay, so the basic core of the mod is definitely the Third International versus the Russians. So what do we do with that here? So we have the Russians taking up to a certain place in Germany, and wherever that is going to really impact the way that the Cold War manifests. I had the idea where instead of a Czechoslovakia, it's like a neutral Czechia to reduce the border tension between this area here in order to actually have peace. The same thing with Austria, just buffer states to make it not really a thing. But then as the game progresses, things could get a little more complicated. Like you see here, this is like gray-green. It's because like this is because Yugoslavia is Slavic and would be aligned with Russia. And I also think that it'd be interesting to have the socialist Italians claiming Dalmatia when there wasn't even that many Italians there, because that could be an interesting conflict, right? She Krasnacht on my not till like Cold War. Would it make sense for the PSA to be separate? I have a really interesting idea about that, and I'll get to that. What else do we got here in my version? So I'll talk about this soon. I don't know if this Geneva is controlled by Switzerland or not. I know that Hot Savoy gets retaken, but we'll see what's most interesting here. The thing that's really cool about the new Russia lore, though, is that there's this Eureka conference mechanic. I'm gonna pull up Hearts of Iron right now, actually, because I think I have a save of what happens when it executes. So that's what we're gonna go with as a little. We can make my mic louder. Oh yeah. So here's the thing. My new setup is temporary, so it means that my microphone is like way farther away from myself than I used to have. It's boosted to the top, and I think this is boosted up to the top too. So I'll try to get closer. The lore is just a Kaiserreich continuation, but with socialists beating the Germans instead of the Germans and the Entente beating the socialists like it does in Kalterkrieg. So Kaiserreich's still loading up, but when it comes over here, the international blocks here and how they form are to be decided still. Because if you see here, they have the Cairo Pact winning, but I don't want to show Red Knight. Shout out to Red Knight. I think it's like Rotenacht. I don't know how to pronounce it properly in German. I don't want to show their in progress stuff when it's not ready. But the way that they've approached it is pretty interesting. And if they are okay with me showing off what they have in progress, I'll definitely share it when the time comes for the video. But right now I don't really want to leak their in development stuff when they've let me see what they're doing for my own inspiration. But they I can at least say, I'm sure they'll be fine if they say if I do. They have the Ottoman Empire still surviving, while in original Krasnacht they didn't. So this could be because the Ottoman rework hadn't come out by the time that Krasnacht did, but when the Ottoman rework came out for the Red Knight developers, then they knew, so they could just go from there. Let me see here. I think that this is this is what happens. So can you guys see my Hearts of Iron yet? Now you can. Okay. So I played like a really short time lapse. I strengthened Russia. I strengthened all the third international countries. And then this is what happens. I think this is the aftermath of the Eureka conference. You can see, even though the war would have broken off, the Entente are still around, and they're guaranteed by Russia. I think Russia guarantees their independence, but at least they have a collaboration. The idea is that they like work together, so they have a very good opinion. This is what happens if you go down the solidaritist path here. And this is what I think that we need to do, because if the savior of the world or even the ideocratic principle are taken as focuses, which means that the ideocrats took over instead of the solidarists, then it will cause a big problem. Like it'll just go to war, and that defeats the purpose of it being a Cold War, right? So it needs to go down this path, and thankfully, because the lore for Kaiserreich has been fleshed out so much, we know what they can do and why they do it. The Tislet Peace Conference, I think it's called that, but I know that there's a focus here. The Eureka Conference. I didn't actually see this event chain myself. I just saw the after effects of it. How many Krasnacht rivals are there? I think there's actually like 4. Like it's kind of crazy. I'm aware of 2, and I've been interacting with one more than the other, but there are at least 2. Okay, so this is what came out of the save that I did, but we're not really going to be taking this for fact. It's just really interesting to see how this sort of world would manifest. Obviously, United States of America, we can talk about that. There's actually a lot of interesting things we can do with that. And I'll get you guys' opinion on it soon. But the thing that was interesting for me is that because of the way that Japan was scripted, like even here, they're not even fighting? That's interesting. The Russian state and these people can fight, and then it would cause Japan and them to fight, or we could just have Semyonov and not even show up. There's a lot of things that we can do. And a lot of things that we can do even without respecting Kaiserreich as a timeline, because this is our own fictional concept. We don't need to do anything. What is that? Oh, Lebanon can just be... That's cute. I like that. Okay. Well, let's go back to the Photoshop document. Hold on. A new dev in one of them? Yeah, maybe. I'm wondering if the proxy wars would take place. Here's the craziest thing that I learned after talking to some former Krasnacht developers. And I'm sure that somebody from the team will see this and then like correct me. But to this developer's understanding, Russia could not do anything but wait for the Third Internationale to attack them. There were very limited ways that they could attempt to sow seeds of distrust between the socialist European powers. And sometimes it would work. But the core gameplay aspect was that Russia could not do anything but wait to be invaded. And I think that the reasoning behind this is that like the Savinkov regime would be so dysregulated after Savinkov's death that they'd be too busy fighting each other instead of preparing for the Third Internationale to come to them. But problem is, you can't really have a Cold War if you're going to be having it only be that they can just die, right? And so here's the thing. Like, I actually get this approach, and I'm going to probably approach it with that in mind when I make my scenario. But I just don't really agree with that at all. There's a lot of things that we can do here conflict-wise, even just in Europe, that I think is really interesting. Okay, so it's still called the Tislet Conference. Okay. Brazil. Yeah, so Brazil, I think they had it be a integralist monarchy. And I think that's pretty cool. I want to keep that because even in Ireland, if you go integralist Ireland and then Russia is Savinkovist and the Germans are defeated, the regent of the monarchy just becomes a national republic. And that's pretty interesting. And maybe we could do something like that too. But it makes sense for Ireland to be socialist given how close they are to Britain and how there's no Entente to save them geographically. Would Russia give up Lviv for Poland? Yeah, there's a lot of things that we can debate and discuss, and we will get into that soon. But I had a former Canadian developer you've spoken with before. From what I remember, Russia couldn't trigger World War III. Yeah, thank you very much, Sentinel. I will pin your message so that people can look to you for any extra Krasnacht lore. So if we're going to look at the at this scenario in Europe right now. It's something I just want to keep in mind while we go. So I'm going to have France be syndicalist. I tried the anarchist path kind of in like a little game I was playing just to get myself familiar with everything. And I also know that there is a Third International rework being made currently in Kaiserreich, but from my own personal experience working on Kalterkrieg, you can't really base it off of in development things because they're still being debated with the team in order to make sure that it's good enough to be able to push to public. So we're just going to use what is basically there, and I'm going to do really broad strokes because I don't have the time to properly look into each fringe socialist movement that didn't get enough traction to come to power in our timeline, manifested in a fictional world and then brought into another fictional world, right? Like I can just do the broad strokes. Why not totalist for France? Because if we make everything totalist, then it will kind of be just too gloomer. And there's a lot of interesting dynamics that can happen with a syndicalist France. So you know how totalism is like, let's take the syndicalist model of workers' unions and then control the unions, while syndicalist is like the unions should control the government, and the anarchists are like there shouldn't be a government at all. If France continues up their mobilization long after the war won, the unions could theoretically strike. Striking was banned in the Soviet Union, and it would be banned in any totalist country. But then having a dynamic where the ruler, like the elected officials leading the government of France, have a conflict with the workers that they're supposed to represent, that's a pretty interesting dynamic. It could be an interesting like moment of weakness that Russia could use to their advantage. Another interesting dynamic for conflict is Italy. Now, I use Mussolini, I use yes man in every single one of my things and so far, so I was reluctant to do this, but the thing is, this is actually really interesting to think about, right? So Mussolini, in fact, yes man, see, I'm rusty. Yes man wanted Greater Italy. He even wanted Greater Italy when he was a socialist. So if we have national France, it's probably even still existing in Algeria, which is interesting, but that would like immediately fall apart, right? Let's say nationalist France is in Algeria. They still have Corsica. Okay, they sign a deal with Russia to peace out with the Entente. Who gets Corsica? Now we're talking about how there was a problem. There's even a huge debate about all the developers of Krasnacht about where Alaska should go. Now imagine that there's an Italian minority cultural language speaking island that has been part of France for like 300 years. That has been taken back by the Third International. Why shouldn't it go to Italy? Why not? Like, why does France get Corsica when it was only in like even the way that France got Corsica? The Genoese sold it to the French crown. Like, it's a capitalist thing. Like, Mussolini would be, yes man, would be really upset, right? So then he would be like, I don't want to be a part of this international thing here. I'm going to start doing my own thing. Maybe even start flirting with the Russians. There'll be an Italian civil war. I think that is the most reasonable thing to do. And to put it simply, it would be people who are like syndicalists and people who are totalists, and these totalists could even start being like, oh, maybe Savinkov was right, but I don't think they'll win. I think they'll just they'll leave it. Like, for example, if this civil war lasts too long, Russia could then be like, no, we want Italy to be unified, let's go to war. But then it's like, okay, well, Yugoslavia is like, what, bro? Like, they have Dalmatia, they have what is this called? It's like Slovenia. They have parts of Slovenia here. Like, why are we letting them get away with this? And then Austria too is like, I kind of want this back. And then there's a huge civil war about it that could actually escalate into a total war. So I really want Yes Man to be here. Turtleneck Man runs the Totalists in Britain. I think that he should be there. But the interesting thing about Turtleneck Man is that even though he was authoritarian, he would be in agreement with the other socialist countries of France and Iberia that we should probably unite into a European Union in order to actually fight back against the Russians. there's literally no downside. They're already atheistic. They're already like revisionist nationalists or whatever. Like we don't need nationalism anymore. We can just work together as socialist principles dictate. And then France is like, yeah, but you're a totalist. You don't really respect the will of the people. And then they have the problem with the strikes. And then Turtleneck Man is like, well, you should have probably just not let them have the ability to strike in the first place. And the France is either like, yeah, you're right, this whole syndicalist thing is kind of BS, let's go with this other guy in an election, which then causes another problem. Or the syndicalists hold on firm, and then Iberia, I don't know what Iberia is doing, but Iberia, the movement in Spain was very anarchistic, so they'd be the most anarchistic out of all these countries here. Turn on the translator, like the auto dubber. I think that only happens when I guess I can't tell you because sorry, I'm sure that there'll be some sort of solution in the future. Hold on, let's see. Do we have a Taiwan parallel? Hold on, there's a lot of messages I just completely missed. So one thing about the international forces in America, they're supposed to have a Sino-Soviet style split. Yeah, we'll definitely get to that. National France is dead in Canaan, but there was debates about okay. Cindy America, Totalist Europe, Radical Socialist Latin America. Okay, interesting. What if National France survives but relocates to Senegal? Maybe. Taiwan parallel. Yeah. Hello, I'm new here. What's your House of Reform mod? Great War Redux. Yeah, that's cool. I'll take a look at that. The alternate paths there have been pretty interesting. I've seen like Tommy K videos about it, so I'll take a look. Excuse me. So another dynamic that I thought would be interesting to show the Italian-European split here is, according to socialist principles, there should be one German state. The only reason why an Austrian identity exists compared to a German identity is because of dynastic BS, right? There should be no reason that an Austrian identity should be separate from the Germans. Italy wants there to be a buffer state between themselves and Germany. But why would you want a buffer state if you're working with your friends? Okay, well, that's because Italy like wants Corsica, and they want probably even like referendums in the former Piedmontese territories here in France to have proper self-determination, whatever argument they can use. So they're already acting against the Third Internationale, but there should be an Italian civil war. The Yugoslavians should move in to occupy Dalmatia and Istria. Maybe even the Austrians take over South Tyrol. I'm not entirely certain. But what I do think is really interesting of a conflict is if after the Italians have their civil war, Austria doesn't have a benefactor, and in my initial outline here, we have them being neutral. What if the Germans invade the Austrians? And then what if the Austrians start to adopt national revivalism as an ideology, and then there's another flashpoint, right? So there's actually so many different flashpoint things that you can have here, and the longer that it goes on, like, I'm not sure how I want to have it structured just yet. I think it makes more sense for the Russians to, especially after Savinkov dies, they need to buy time to consolidate their regime before they go into another war. While the Third Internationale would want to push it sooner. It could even be that if they manage to get a flashpoint and invade Russia before this whole Italian problem happens, then there's no civil war in Italy. They're just stronger than they beat it. So then Russia is trying to prevent that from happening. There's a Taiwan parallel. Reds. Okay. I don't know what Reds are, but it might just be another Krasnacht style thing. Austrians are German doesn't mean that Germans are one people. Yeah, I agree with that. But according to socialist principles, the people who would be in Germany would be arguing for it, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that every single socialist would be like, yeah, we should do that or whatever. But like, you could have Germany broken up into a bunch of different national regions, like L'Ordre Nouveau, but I wouldn't do that. I think that it just makes more sense in a European-based thing that they would have a conflict like that. Everyone's talking about a Taiwan parallel. Why not divide Austria into East and West? Like, kind of like they did in our timeline. I mean, yeah, that's what they did in our timeline. I think, hold on. Yeah, so this is, I took this from the Google Doc. I didn't put it in the description of this live stream, but I will soon if I remember. These are the occupation zones of Austria. Notice how this is Soviet. It obviously became a neutral republic, and the reason why they did neutral is so that they could avoid so much border tension between their blocs. Because like if Yugoslavia was 100% on board with the Soviet Union when they were like kind of independent communists, then there would be a lot more tension between the West and the East. So everybody wanted a neutral Austria. Stalin even said we should have a neutral Germany, but nobody bought that because then they could just have a communist elected in there and then they would just become there. So then Germany was split, right? So it does make sense to have something like this, and I would even consider that, but I think that it would be more interesting to do something like having Austria be this way because Italy demands it to be. Like, and then they're like, okay, fine, whatever. We'll just make it a neutral state, and then it's neutral instead of just having another tension point. What's L'Ordre Nouveau? It's like TNO, but the Third International beats the Germans. So there's like a French civil war to determine who's the successor. The Germans have a warlord period. It's like it is the new order, but in a Kaiserreich thing. But it's run by Russians, and they're like, I don't know, no, nothing against Russians in general, but they were like Z-Chads or whatever you want to call them. They were supporting Russia in the Ukrainian conflict. So I'm not trying to give them any sort of signal boost there, but I do want to shout them out because it is an interesting. Well, not shout them, you know what I mean? Like mention that they exist. Let's see. Poland, Romania, Moscow land. Yeah, that's the idea. Poland, Slovenia, Hungary, Romania, Yugoslavia. Yeah, so these are things that I'm not entirely certain of yet. I like the idea of Poland being that separatist rebellion that can happen if you do well enough as Russia. That's why I have them having extra land here that they should not have. I like how Russia goes so far as to get the Carpathian Ruthenians, but it might even be that Poland exists up to here, then somebody else gets this, and then we go from there. The thing about Russian nationalists, yeah, they want all the Russian former imperial territories, including Poland, but it makes more sense to have Poland be like a satellite state in this context, because then you can take more land off of Germany. You can see here in the original Krasnacht, Kaliningrad is taken by Russia and all the Baltics. But I almost think that if we're going to be going for a solidarist Russia, they would probably want independent or quote-unquote independent, the puppet states here, right? You could have them be integrated into the state. I'm not entirely certain yet. It's not too consequential given everything. I don't want to try to look like I'm being revisionistic in this sort of sense. It's like, oh, Russia didn't want to claim all these territories. They absolutely did. But it is an interesting dynamic, in my opinion, where you can elect to support the separatist nationalists against the Germans in order to advance your conflict better, and then even backstab them later and demand their subjugation afterwards. Like in a Savinkov thing I did, the Lithuanian nationalists revolted, but then I demanded their subjugation and had to invade them again. That could be what happens here. Like, yeah, you're independent, but join us. No, fight. Then that's a opportunity for the Third International to be anti-imperialist and then support them and have a conflict. So there's a lot of things we can do there. We will talk about America, including Canada, when I get to that point, because I have some ideas I want to share, but not right now. Savinkov wanted Polish independence. Yeah, that makes sense then. Estonia always aligned with Russia after the Baltic. Yeah, so I haven't been as involved in Kaiserreich lore as I used to be, so I will need to rely on you guys a lot. But one thing I do think is really important is that we need to acknowledge that Kaiserreich, even though it's an amazing mod, cannot possibly cover everything and ensure that an interesting Cold War scenario can appear afterwards. So we will need to be taking a different approach sometimes. But yeah, an independent Estonia, independent Latvia, independent Lithuania could be interesting. Worth noting that Lithuania would also have different borders. Poland would have different borders. These are based off of IRL borders, not actually the Kaiserreich states. So I'll see if I can improve that in time for the video to come out, but I do need to get my ideas down on paper somehow. Comrade Mango, hey, with Austria, if we want them in the International, we could have a West, East, and South Germany. South Germany and West would be socialist, while East would be national. I like that idea because then it makes it more interesting if there's a Italian split, and then it's like, who's the real Germany? And that would promote a lot more discussions of unification. So I'll definitely keep that in mind. Latvia always joins interesting. I don't know if I'd actually have that happen. I think that part of the peace negotiations will include Latvia becoming a Russian influenced state for national security or something. Lithuania is more rebellious. Yeah, like, you know, the Cold War dynamic where Czechoslovakia was technically a democratic republic, but then over time with pressure in the government, they became a communist republic. We could do something like that. And then there's the Hungarian Revolution of 1950 that was suppressed. You could have a dynamic that we can do here, maybe even with Lithuania. Although there was an interesting dynamic that I thought would be interesting is if we had it be that Romania was the problem. Because even in our history, the King Michael did his coup, joined the Allies, and was even awarded like a medal from Stalin. But then Stalin ordered the imprisonment of a bunch of university students and then told King Michael, if you want these people to live, you need to abdicate and become a communist republic, or else they all are not going to live. And then he's like, okay, fine. And then that was how Romania became that way. But in this case, it would be like the Romanians beat the Bulgarians in the Balkan War, and then the Belgrade Pact joins in on the war. So I think that it makes sense in this case to have the Belgrade Pact to be sort of aligned with the Moscow Accord. I know that you can get them directly involved in the Moscow Accord, but their ideologies are so different that you wouldn't want that to be the case. But then there are those integralist monarchy people in Romania that are in conflict with the king that could cause a conflict in here, which turns them completely into a Russian ally, and then that could throw off Yugoslavia. There's a lot of things that we can do with this. Let's see here. Internal fight in integralist Brazil with ultranationalist and monarchist, because half of them integralist are ultranationalist, not monarchist. Yeah, I mean, maybe. You won the Balkan War in this version. In my version, that's the thing. I'm not entirely certain about how the dynamics of the Balkan War are executed in the way that this all works. Oh yeah, I was worried, but this is Deltarune, and Toby Fox doesn't claim copyright music, so thank you, Toby Fox. Hold on. There's a lot going on here. I want to make sure. Balkan War. We could have it be different than the way it is right now. I'm not entirely certain. I'm open to ideas regarding the Balkan War. CSA, we will get to the socialist thing. Yeah, I'll look into those on Snowy. British Civil War. I wouldn't be against a British Civil War in this scenario. It would make sense, but I like the idea more when it comes to Italy, given how the Corsica and the Austrian problem will lend itself to better conflicts in the future. Like better, you know what I mean? Like it has more tension between Russia than a British Civil War would, right? Like a British Civil War, like who would be the other guys? Would it be monarchists or would it just be anti-maximalists? Because that's interesting, but I'm not entirely certain. In my infinite wisdom, do you know if there's a mod with a total third international victory, but the Entente side? No, I'm not aware of that. Do you think there'll be an ultranationalist democratic guerrilla in the CSA? Yeah, I think that would always be the case. And that's an interesting thing that we could look into. Like even in Kalterkrieg, there's still syndicalist insurgents, right? Let's see here. Legionists could be pro-Russian. Yeah, exactly. The monarchists will probably just have to be like somehow eliminated. The National Republic could show up due to like ideological developments. I'm moving the microphone slightly. Sorry if it makes any noise. Let's talk about America now. Yay, USA. So if you guys have seen KgB, this is a Germans win in Europe timeline, while the socialists win in America. You have all these autonomous regions within the greater United States. What I'm thinking is that I think I even made layers for this. Yeah, so this is my second idea for the USA. Wacky, okay? But hear me out. We could have the Rocky Mountain ceasefire happen between the communists, the syndicalists, and the Constitutional Republic, or whatever it's called now, and the new Kaiserreich lore coming out soon. And then have the Pacific be, including Canada, this little bit of Canada, this weak Canada, could also be here in the Pacific. I don't know what we're happening with Japan yet. There's a lot of interesting things we can do with Japan. But this could lend to a continuation conflict where Russia and the Third International send troops to the USA in order to determine their fate. I'm not sure if I would actually go with this. It's a good way to balance out the conflict if we need the Americans to not be involved. There's also the American-European split, like the Sino-Soviet split, which makes sense, especially if you have certain ideological tendencies. But given that I want France to be syndicalist/anarchist, which is a lot more Western democratic than totalism is, and the USA in this timeline would definitely be democratic still, because Americans are democratic. It makes sense for them to stay aligned. I'm not sure what sort of things need to happen to facilitate a split. Maybe totalists come to power in America. I'm not sure. But I do like this version of America, because something that's worth noting, in Kaiserreich's timeline, there's no world where the USA itself has ever been at direct war with Russia, I think. So Russia and the USA would be allies, which is crazy to hear about. It obviously wouldn't be the case if there's a socialist America. But if you have a remnant of the USA still existing in the Pacific that's fighting a socialist version, it's like an extension of the conflict across hemispheres. So instead of it just being East versus West, it's like West and East, you know what I mean? And then there could be a fight here. That's interesting. People like sending volunteers to conflict and then they grow bigger. That can totally happen, and we can do that. But I can understand why it might be against the core of the mod being a communist or socialist, you know what I mean? Workers' Council Republic USA, Workers' Council Republic Europe versus reactionaries, right? Let's see here. Syndicalist South America. Well, the thing is that integralist Brazil is so cute. I want to keep integralist Brazil, especially when the ideology of integralism becomes less and less mainstream as the Savinkovists take over power of the national populist ideology. And then, like the other guy said, there were a lot of integralists that were actually more just nationalists than monarchists. So you could have an internal conflict there, which then lends to the Third International even going, what's it called? Realpolitik? Like not necessarily supporting any socialists, because there might not be any socialist movements there, but you could do two-stage revolution thing where you get rid of the ultranationalists and then the monarchy becomes democratic, and then the monarchy allows for socialists to get elected, and then the socialists overthrow the monarchy. Like, that would be a really long-term goal for the Third International. At the very least, it eliminates Brazil from being a part of the Tsar Pact. I think that was the term for the Russian alliance. Because if the ultranationalists just take over Brazil, then there's a Tsar Pact member, right? And then the Americans might not like that. I really don't know what we'll do here, but I do know that I want Brazil to be integralist in this timeline. It just makes a lot more sense given the ideological blocks. Spartalax is right. Spatialax. Hungary be bigger. There's no Hungary Soviet Republic. There's no reason to be this harsh. Yes, so I can see that idea with Hungary. It's one of the things I thought would be interesting is if the Romanians have their internal conflict that the Russians come to stabilize, they could revise the borders with Hungary. They could get northern Transylvania. Maybe Bulgaria is like on the fence, and then when they get to Bruja back, they become full members of the alliance, and then Russia gets Bessarabia too. Like they could just partition Romania, and then Romania just has to deal with it. And they're under nationalists, which is better, even though they want Greater Romania, and they just lost their Greater Romania. So really hypocritical, really interesting thing here. And then it would make sense for Hungary to get more land, but you're talking to Slavic nationalists. You wouldn't want... The Slavic nationalists would want a Slovenia. The Slavic nationalists would want a Yugoslavia. The only remaining territory for Hungary to claim is in Romania. The Slavic nationalists would want Carpathian Ruthenia. Like, Hungary is just kind of screwed up, unfortunately. Hungary would have a better chance joining up with the socialists to get their revisionist claims here than Russia, even though this is a nationalist. You know what I mean? Huey Long is now American people. Hold on. Do you think there'd be a third American Civil War? No, I think that they'd be too exhausted for that. I think that something like that could occur far off into the distant future of this timeline. Because I think it could be that the Second Amendment is revoked, and then that means that it'll be a lot harder for any sort of civil war to happen. We'll just have to see how that goes, I guess, when I develop out the timeline. I'm not against the idea. It could happen, but I think that it might make more sense if there's not a civil war like that. And if there is, it's just a continuation of the Pacific, which is more of the Constitutional Republic or whatever it is, and the socialists than anything else. Honest with you, I'd like to have a bigger Royal Canada losing Eastern Territory if it was split. I would probably make their borders based off of the Rocky Mountains. I think that this is the Rocky Mountains, and I think there might be Rocky Mountains here. If there's like a Mississippi line, then we'll have a lot more interesting of dynamic here. But I don't think the socialists would do that poorly. It would balance it out more, but then where is the Third International going to get their oil from? Like, they kind of need Texas in order to keep things balanced. So we'll see how it goes. But I will, if I do take this approach, or anybody takes this approach, I just want to put this out as an idea. They could change it however they like. What Kaiserreich Civil War scenario seems the most realistic? Well, I would go with plausible. And I like the way that they redid the Kaiserreich Civil War as compared to before with the CSA and the AUS. The naming convention changes are way better. The alignment changes are way better. It's just way better. I really like that a lot. Hungary could get Transylvania, but here's the thing. Like, given that the Romanians fought with the Russians against the Austro-Hungarians, which the Hungarians are just going to be this small for now until a potential crisis in Romania. That's how I would say about that. They don't stay on the West Coast. They exile in the Pacific Islands. So that's the thing here. Twilight Struggle actually does this. The American remnants are in Hawaii, and they can invade Alaska. Like, they recently did a teaser about this. I'll see if I can find it. Am I even a part of their server? Yeah, yes I am. Twilight Struggle. Teasers. Copy image. New. From clipboard. Create. So this is what Twilight Struggle does. Shout out to Twilight Struggle. The United Socialist States of America, these are totalists. They're in Hawaii, and they're invading the Aleutians. And there's the Tundra War here, right? They could take over all of Alaska, and they could even escalate further. This is really cool. We could do something like this, but I don't want to take this from them because they just literally shared it for everyone, and we can do a lot more interesting things having this sort of dynamic here, and it lends to a larger conflict or a guaranteed conflict between Russia and the USA. A Cold War? Okay. You meant when you said Cold War scenario. I'm biased to say that Krasnacht... No, I'm sorry. I'm biased to say that Kalterkrieg is the most plausible because I worked on it. But when I look at Twilight Struggle and what they've done, I really like the way that they've approached it. So I would say that Twilight Struggle is probably one of my favorites. Or plausible. There'd be alternate USA remnants in Hawaii. Yeah, like at the very least, there would be American junta either in Puerto Rico or in Hawaii. I'm not sure. And that would be the Taiwan parallel, even though it's not nearly as nuanced as having it in here. But what else do you guys want to talk about? I'll quickly brush on what I have here. So in every Kaiserreich Cold War that I've ever seen, it's just like there's going to be another conflict of Japan and China, or China's not fully unified yet. And it makes sense because like that's exactly what happened in our timeline. The Chinese Civil War was still to finish. It finished obviously. But so it makes sense to have that analog, but I kind of want to go a little more interesting here, where if you are going to have Japan exist still and not get destroyed by everybody else, it would make sense for the reorganized government of China to control at least all the Han and Manchurian areas and then be subjugated to Japan. Meanwhile, Russia, as a part of some sort of like neutrality agreement with Japan, has their sphere of influence in East Turkestan, Mongolia, maybe even Tibet. And then there's an uneasy alliance between these two people, because I don't imagine that the socialists would want to be friends with Japan, and Japan being subjugated by Russia, like how would that happen? So then it has to be Entente remnants, but there's no Entente remnants, they're all in Africa. So Japan just sort of gets a free hand of victory. Why would we want China to still exist as an independent state? This reorganized government of China could lend to a full-on syndicalist revolt. There's a lot of things that we could do here. It's interesting, but this is my basic outline right now. Like, give Japan all of China, because their imperialist adversaries of Germany and the Entente are just gone, so you don't have to worry about that. I like to see Kaiserreich alternatives where Germany goes syndicalist or ultra-nationalist, and ones where Germany wins the Second World War but liberalizes. That's interesting. I'd be surprised to see a Kaiserreich where the socialists win in Germany. It'd be interesting to see how that dynamic happens. I'm worried that this might be too loud now. Hold on, I can change the audio for you guys. Yeah, I think that'll be okay. Will there be a weak Entente faction? I think so. I think the alliance of asses I have here, like the Portuguese, the British, the Germans, the even more unfriendly British, they'll all be in the Southern Cone. Maybe there's more German remnants here. Somalia. This is one of the weirdest things I learned about Krasnacht. They had like a 32-state Somalia, and that was before the supply system changed how it works. It used to be that states took up a lot of processing power. So they had just had a 32-state Somalia for some reason, right? It's crazy. Anyway, Somalia could be aligned even with Russia, I don't know, but it makes sense for them to be Kaiserreich Pact. Kaiserreich Pact would be like Muslim anti-imperialist, which means that if a national France does exist in Algeria, which is unlikely, they'll be able to have a proxy conflict with that. Russia might want to have nationalist France on their side. Third International wouldn't, so they would support the Kaiserreich Pact. They would support the Kaiserreich Pact here, but then the problem is the Kaiserreich Pact is like not necessarily socialist. But then it's like, okay, well, they're not industrially developed. That's fine. Other people would be like, no, we're just supporting this. Is not okay. And there'd be a little conflict there. They wouldn't be able to be full allies, but they would support this just to weaken everything else. So yeah, I do think that there'd be an Entente thing down here. Original Krasnacht had a Kuomintang in China, but split into warlords. Yeah, that is right. I think that is what they did. But I want to go like full doomer in there, just make it a lot, because Japan on its own is not nearly strong enough to deal with a European Union, especially with the Americans if they're still around, or a national revivalist Russia who could have a blank check to start expanding further into Eurasia with Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey, all these things. Former Entente and German remnants work together. Yeah, that's the idea. The alliance of Europeans are just going to be working together to keep their minority rules, but they're going to eventually fall apart. Like, the civil wars that would be triggered would be so in favor of the much more populist people that there'd be basically, it would be very unlikely that they'd survive. It would be like an NZ sort of scenario for them. What year does it start? Okay, the thing is, I'm not sure when the year would start, but I think one of the biggest pitfalls for these Kaiserreich continuation mods to do is they start it immediately after the Kaiserreich content starts to go stale. Because once their thinking is like, okay, once that happens, you want the game to continue. You just love Kaiserreich so much. But if you make it too close, then you're not in mutually assured destruction, so you can't have a dynamic like TNO. And I think that's what the Russian Krasnacht style mod does. They have it later than just the 50s immediately. But I want to take the approach that Krasnacht tried to do, where it's kind of just a build up to another bigger war, more than just a Cold War, because this sort of invasion, this sort of like final fight between the Third International and the Russians is pretty interesting. And this dynamic that they're trying to keep in Europe to try to keep the peace is clearly not going to. But yeah, so think about like Thousand Week Reich. They could still have a war. They could still have a Cold War, but it's determined by the player or the random actions that cause it. I wouldn't say that Russia would have a civil war. They'd have like a death of Stalin sort of power struggle. The only civil war that I can see guaranteed to happen is Italy, because then it makes the dynamics a lot more interesting with the former Third International or International Forces nations. But yeah, so the approach I'm taking is not necessarily Cold War, but like Thousand Week Reich, where if peace is kept, then it's interesting, but it doesn't need to be. And you still get to play the Hearts of Iron 4 game, which is a war game where you fight in wars. But it still gives a lot of proxy conflict, so that could escalate into a full war. So like, there's a lot of things that you can do here. In one Krasnacht successor, the Entente and Reichsbat evolved into the Halifax Accord. Well, so there's still Canadians in Canada in that? That's interesting. National Defense could be split in Algeria. What? Oran region transformed into a European state. Yeah, interesting. Mini Cold War in the West. Kaiserreich Pact, which is more authoritarian. A social democratic constitutional Iran. Maybe. Or the ideologies are flipped. Could be either one. It's interesting. Japan could be sort of like a third faction. It's aligned with Russia, but Japan liberalizes and is sort of a Russo-Japanese split. Yeah, I can actually see that, because the authoritarian Japanese would want to subjugate China. But if Japan starts to thaw and this Pan-Asian alliance starts to manifest more in a wholesome way, it would be like, okay, China, you should get the rest of your former territories. And the Russians like, no. And then that sort of transition would be supported by the Third International, because they don't want the Russians to have only a one front war, right? So that's an interesting dynamic that can occur over time. I agree. You fight wars in Hearts of Iron, tell that to the Tino devs. Okay, Tino is like kind of brilliant in the way that they manage to only do proxy wars and then have a bunch of little mini games that make the game actually enjoyable and make you play 10 games without ever going to direct war as the United States. Like, that's brilliant. It takes a lot of effort though. And I wouldn't say that this is the right call to make, because the further you stray away from our history, the harder it is to make anything make sense. So for Kaiserreich continuation Cold Wars, you kind of need it to happen immediately after. Just give me a minute. Sorry about that. This is one you've been talking about this. Oh, okay. Wait, you guys... Wait, really? Oh my god, no way. I didn't know that Canada was still independent in your... That's really interesting. That makes it a little more solid, and it makes the Third International not as strong. So that's pretty smart. Can we have the Third International be hypocritical and partake in neo-colonialism? Like eternal reconstruction governments? Maybe. It could even be that it could happen within the span of the game. France, the commune of France, manages to take out San France. They're occupying Algeria, and it's like, well, what about the French people living here? And then people are like, well, they shouldn't be here. Send them back to France. It's like, well, but they want to stay here. Why don't we just do something where everyone can get along? It's like, no, you're supporting imperialism. What are you doing? And they could have a fight over that. That could be interesting. That's a good... No, it's not very Giga Russia. You could have it be way bigger. At the Baltic, you have Finland, because I think in the original Krasnacht, they even controlled Finland directly. I know in one teaser they had Finland being controlled directly. What's going on in Indonesia? That's the thing. I see no reason why Japan wouldn't be able to facilitate the complete destruction of the colonial forces in Indonesia. So there'd be no Dutch Indochina or Dutch Indonesia or anything like that. One thing that is interesting is that Krasnacht always had a totalist India that was supposed to be like a third power aligned with the International but not directly aligned, that would be a counterbalance to Japan. I think that makes sense in this scenario, especially if we're going to be going with one where there's a full-on communist Maoist style revolution in the reorganized government of China. And then that could even mean that the Russians get involved somehow and directly attack India. Maybe Afghanistan is actually like a Russian puppet, and then they sort of facilitate expansion into Muslim majority regions in the border territories. That's a pretty interesting thing. I'll definitely have a totalist India here. The one thing about the totalist Indians is apparently they had like the most wanky focus tree ever. They had Burma still, and it was cord. They had this dynamic where they could do a focus to demand that the Siamese monarchy abdicates and becomes a socialist country, and they always accept. There's no fight. The Subhas Chandra Bose somehow solves all of the conflicts in their state, so that it's completely stable, and there's no, like, come on, like that's not, like, at some point, are you making a Hearts of Iron 4 mod where a conflict is fought with an interesting dynamic between nations? Or are you writing a fan fiction where the good guys win and the bad guys drool and they're the worst people ever in the world? Like, no, like I don't agree with that. Maoist India, red tiger in the sky. Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's a pretty interesting dynamic, and I want to see that, but not nearly as powerful as they were depicted in initial versions of the mod, for sure. Island of Papua. Yeah, the island of Papua will be united. That's the one where the Portuguese had that weird agreement with the Dutch, right? Where like the Portuguese have a port on one side of the island, but the south of the island, and then the Dutch get the rest. Yeah, that'll be united. Something between Burma and Indochina versus Thailand. Yeah, I think that those sort of conflicts are definitely something that should happen. I'm not entirely certain how that will happen yet, but it would be cool to have a Japanese fight with maybe even somebody who's just not necessarily Japanese aligned, but it could be Russian aligned, and then there's like okay, Japan, Russia, you need to figure out your stuff. Siam Kingdom come back? Maybe. Wrong island? Island of Papua. Hold on, I need to look this up. Oh yeah, right. That's the this island. Maybe. How does the Krasnacht have it? Yeah, there's no way that this would exist. No, or this. What the hell? That's the German part. The only thing that could be interesting is the Australians having part of it, and then this part. Or Australia, we could unite it under Australia, but then Japan, the communists here, start to try to fight. What is this? What? Okay. This looks like... There's no way this is a Turkish island. So there's like a communist state here. Interesting. And when I say communist, I mean like socialist. You know what I mean? Like they are different, but offhand, like especially in the case of India here, there'd be a lot more akin to IRL communists than socialist movements like the syndicalists. Third world Bose thought maybe. Australia supporting the Dutch colony. I think that was the idea. But this is such a weak thing here. Like, there's no way they'd be able to resist. They would be most likely just a part of the Japanese faction. Maybe we could have a meme thing where Elizabeth marries into the Yamato family. It could be interesting. But I don't know about that. Yeah, so definitely going to go with the Totalist India. I like the dynamic of a Karapat here. Rude Buster is a really good song, but I'm starting to get annoyed by it. I imagine you guys are too. This is copyrighted. This isn't. Let's go with this again. Take a little deep breath. Can you pin my Australia explanation? Where is it? I don't see it. Is Australia supporting? Yeah, sorry. I want to focus more on the stream than pinning the comment. I'm sure somebody could find it. Sorry. I don't have any mods either. I guess this is my signal to get a mod. I don't know why Australia is in two parts, but there's a Western Australia and a Eastern Australia. It could be that one is a republic and one's a monarchy. I don't know. Why people asking, like, okay, thank you. I'll take a look at that. So yeah, we want this dynamic here. The one thing that I would like you guys' thoughts on is the Middle East. So Red Knight has the Ottoman Empire still existing, but the Kara Pact is such a interesting dynamic, especially with the communist socialist powers in Europe. It's a good extension for them to execute their anti-imperialist ideology, and it gives them the opportunity to slowly integrate them into their sphere. It gives the Russians the ability to start to try to get into that fundamentalist thing, because their ideology is like, yes, religion is good, but also the state, right? So there's a lot of things here that could lead to interesting proxy conflicts. The one thing that I don't know what to do is Turkey. So I actually have two different outlines for the way that Germany could be split. In this outline, it's more like our timeline where the Kiel Canal is controlled by the West. But I almost think that it would make more sense, especially in the terms of trying to make sure that there's an interesting dynamic between Russia and the Third International, that there's a canal that's under the Russian control so that they can control the Baltic and then put their navy out here to fight these guys. In our history, it's been a long-term thing where the Russians are supposed to be kept away from the Mediterranean, kept away from the North Atlantic. They have always been told, no, you can't have the Kiel, no, you can't have the Bosphorus. I think that in order to make this mod more interesting and not just military invade Russia, you need to have a little bit more of a dynamic, like a problem for the West to deal with. And that could either be that Turkey is just a full ally of Russia, which gives them access to the Mediterranean Sea and allows them to screw up here, or Germany's split in such a way that lets Russia go through the Kiel Canal. You could do both, but that might be too much, so you have to do one. So I have this outline here if I decide to go with that way. In fact, in the faction outline, it shows the other way, because I initially was wanting to do it like this, right? But how far does this Kaiserreich go? Which nations would go with which? Is there even really potential for a socialist revolution in these former colonial areas? I'm not entirely sure. Let's see now. Let's take a look at what everyone else is saying. Eastern Australia is Republic, anti-Entente. Western Australia is pro-Entente. Yeah, I'll pin that one. Australia could be syndicalist and Australia could be a British exiled dominion. Maybe. Yeah, that's an interesting tension point. But would we really want tension between Japan and the Third International? Well, they could just stay eternally divided like Korea. That could happen. But then, like, how would the syndicalists even reach that far if they don't have any African outposts? Like, maybe by this point, the development of naval technology allows for those sort of long expeditions, but we can't really guarantee that. Do Cold War dynamic between Iran and Egypt? I agree with that. I think that there should be some tension between Iran and the Kaiserreich. I think the Kaiserreich is kind of overextended as is. I'm not sure what would happen with Syria. I know that in Kalterkrieg there's a Syrian civil war. There might be something like that here too. But I really want to know what I should be doing with Turkey here, because I think having Turkey become a revivalist republic like Russia actually makes a lot of sense, because the people who would be left over there would be wanting their old empire back, but would acknowledge that the problems with their empire were mostly because of the old institutions of the monarchy, and still be religiously aligned. So they'd have to find a way to, like, put the religion stuff together. But then that goes against the orthodox nationalist sort of idea that Russia has, that they want to be influencing Greece, they want to be influencing Yugoslavia, they want to be influencing Bulgaria to join their alliance because they are the third patriarchate. Why would you let the Turkish continue to control Constantinople? But then you can't just have Russia invading Turkey. Maybe you could. Maybe you could have Russia demanding the Straits like Stalin was considering doing before he died. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know why the Greek sort of situation ended up in our timeline where there was the communists there that were fighting, but then Stalin stopped supporting them so that they'd be West aligned. I don't know why that happened. But and then also there's the whole Bulgaria thing. Like, now, I don't know. I'll have to look into Kaiserreich stuff more, but I'll see what you guys think. So Memer thinks that it's based to have a Turkish nationalist sort of trying to revive their Ottoman sphere. Maybe it's Iran and Turkey versus the Kaiserreich. Maybe. I do think that Turkey would be super aligned with Russia, though. But then there's also like all the minorities in Caucasus that Turkey would be oppressing with because of their ideology that would be against Russian designs and principles. So, but that's an interesting dynamic where all of these places could be neutral, but then eventually lines need to be drawn in the sand. Like, if Russia's more pragmatic, they would want to be going for having Yugoslavia in their alliance, but maybe they won't, because if they decide to not have Yugoslavia in their alliance, then they could have Austria in their alliance, which lets them go to war with the West, or at least weaken the German national movement or the German communist movement, and then allow for their Germany to become more dominant here. Lets them potentially be allies with Italy if they keep Dalmatia. So they could move their entire borderline westwards more and put more pressure on the Third International. So then what happens with Yugoslavia? It could be then that Russia goes in and supports Bulgaria going in and taking these lands, Hungary taking these lands, Croatia becoming independent. That could be something that they do. And then in that case, they wouldn't be so much Orthodox, but then Bulgaria is also Orthodox. They would probably want to take all of their former territories, including their claims in this Thrace region, and then what happens to Istanbul? Stargrad? Maybe not. And then they could go in here. There's a lot of things that Russia could do, and a lot of reasons why they could do it, but then what is the Third International going to do in response? If you keep pushing Yugoslavia down, they're going to have a socialist revolt here. And there were a lot of socialist Yugoslavians. And that could be a huge problem for whatever puppet governments they put in here. Even in the case where totalists win in Italy, they aren't going to be direct friends with Italy, but they are not going to be friends with the Third International either. So there'd just be a fight over here. Maybe they get involved. In any case where Russia gets invaded by Turkey, the West is going to support Turkey, no matter what they are. And then that could influence their ideology and how they manifest. Kaiserreich would not be supporting Turkey, but they might, because then what's Russia going to do when they get further into the Caucasus here? They're just going to do more things to screw up their spheres of influence. Third International, Franco-Italy would be a nationalist state, but the pro-Third International. I can actually see that. That makes sense, because why would they want to be friends with the Russians? So then Russia's trying to find ways to subvert that. Yeah, maybe. That could be an interesting thing. And it's kind of like the dynamic that Turkey had in our Cold War II, where they were kind of West, but they weren't exactly full alliance. Maybe I'm wrong, but I know that Mustafa Kemal wanted Turkey to be neutral. It obviously didn't end up that way completely, but could Russia invade Turkey to liberate Kurdistan? Potentially, and then also annex Armenian regions and stuff. That could be an interesting dynamic. And then the fact that they'd be invaded at all means that the Third International could do some socialist stuff. There's a socialist Turkey that's in conflict with the occupying Russians, and then whatever's happening in the Bosphorus Straits could be an interesting dynamic too. The Russian backstab, yeah, maybe. I do want Russia not to just be seen as a passive power in this scenario. I want them to be active. I want them to have like one or two conflicts where they are actually just straight up invading a nation. Meanwhile, the Third International wouldn't have many nations to invade. They probably wouldn't want to completely join the Germans in their attack on Austria after the Italian problem, just to avoid it escalating to war. But they will absolutely join in on that if they need to. Weakened Ottomans could have a civil war. Maybe. I'd like to think though that like they are just consolidated enough in Anatolia that they don't have to have a civil war. I don't want to make every conflict a civil war. Check out Damocles Cold War. There's an episode about Yugoslavia, Bulgaria in this mess. Damocles Cold War? Is that another Krasnacht successor? If that's the case, then I'll look into that. Thank you very much. Australia, I think that any Royal Australia, and if America is split, Royal Canada and Democratic America are part of the weak Entente. I think that it'd be a very, very weird thing for that to be the case. well, let me map this out quickly. So this will be the Entente color. So it'd be this. My cat is rubbing against my arm for pets. It's very cute. Here too. And here, and then Madagascar. Not that side of Australia. This side. New Zealand, Tanzania, Papua, and then the Hawaiian Islands. Oops. I want the Lesotho anti-alias. I want this to not be contiguous. So something like that is extremely weak, but maybe it'll work. Yeah, maybe. I'll consider that. Russia and Egypt versus Iran and Turkey with a mini game to control the west of the Middle East. Maybe. There could be a problem where Iran is controlling like Iraq territories, and that goes against the pan-Arabic sort of state of the Karapat, and then because Turkey's also upset, they align with Iran. But then Russia is like, well, I want claims on all of you guys. So yeah, there's like a weird like collaboration between the Karapat and that. But then I also don't think the Karapat has that level of power projection. But then the Third International would want to do that. But then weakening the buffer states of the Karapat and Russia, of Turkey and Iran, could lead to Russia getting more powerful, and the non-socialist aligned but friends of convenience Karapat are a little stronger, but not very much stronger, and then just ripe for them to have a problem with the Russians. Maybe the Ba'athist movement becomes powerful, but as far as I know, Baathists they aren't syndicalists. They're just authoritarian communist, which causes a problem. So I'm not entirely sure if there'd be like Nasserist, socialist, Arabic, pan-nationalism. I need to look into that. I know that like Tino had this teaser where there's like a Maoist in Syria or something. I don't know. I need to look into that or get some people's thoughts on that. But I know there is the potential for the Karapat to become socialist, and the Third International, where the international forces would do everything that they could to spread the revolution to the Middle East. We'll have to see how that goes. Makes it the old world faction. Yeah, it makes sense. And then it makes sense for them to not just be direct Russia allies. And it gives them the opportunity to at least try to preserve their states. I'd imagine that they wouldn't last in Africa. I'd imagine that they would last in Oceania. And then that might just make them become full members of the Japanese alliance. So having that sort of fluid, like we're small enough to be able to work together and have a reason for that, but then have their faction evolve to join other larger factions makes sense to me. Japan allied to the Entente. Yeah, I think that the Japanese and the Entente would find a way to get allied. Especially, I really do like the idea of a royal marriage between the British and the Japanese royal families, because then it could really solidify Japan in the Oceanian continent and stuff like that. And then it would even potentially allow for Japan to start adopting more British-style liberalism, but that failed, and their entire empire is dead. So why would they try to copy the British style of parliament? There's a lot of things here, but I do think that Russia should be China should definitely just be completely subjugated here. So let's see. I have my KGB outline here. Japan here. Here. I wouldn't have all these separate tags for China. I would just make them their own tags, but we will end up just copying this over here and put it up, not into the Krasnacht file yet, because I don't know if I want to keep this stuff. the Dutch East Indies. This is just a color overlay. I'll hide these for now. Is this really just? Oh, did I? Oops. When I made that faction of these people, I instead of putting it on the factions outline, I put it on the Russia outline. That was my mistake. Faction outline here. Then you select this and you put it here. So now it's in this layer, and now we can hide this layer. And now we have Japan here, and the 8 provinces in China Sea. Like, maybe we keep this dynamic here, but I'm not sure about that. I think it makes more sense to have them be a unified nation, as far as you can go anyway. And then these places will probably just end up being Japanese sphere. Western Australia, I don't know if, I kind of like the idea of Western Australia existing, just because it shows that they're weak and there's also not really worth fighting over. There could be a problem where if they fight Western Australia, then there are weak points in Africa where the Third International can invade there and they'll just completely collapse. Maybe that's something that happens during the span of the game. We do something like that. What the these Gen Z slangs are really throwing me off here. Yeah, I know I keep saying communist, but you know what I mean. 1970s at this story, maybe. I think that makes more sense to do like a 10-year time frame. Give several different conflicts that can happen at different points of the time, and then end the content within around 10 years. Maybe 5. 5 might be more reasonable, because that's roughly around when it was like the middle of the war in 1941, if you're starting 1936. No, it makes more sense to do maybe like 6-7 years, but a maximum 10. Maximum 10. The East would be alliance of asses, the West would be a republic, because I think that's actually the dynamic that happened in our history, where there's almost a civil war of where Western Australia seceded from the USA. The Old World faction, when the American, they're split. The older faction, so join the Japanese to make a 4th faction. Yeah. If they manage to completely liberate there, but here's an interesting thing. If nationalists in America take over, why wouldn't they just like go, "Hey, Russia, we'll be your friend and we'll give you back Alaska"? Crazy, but it's Russian nationalists. They'd want everything back, right? So they would probably take that deal, and they have a foothold in America, and then the USA and the Canadians are back, but how far back would they be? Probably not very friendly, especially if Quebec is a place that people can exist in and be French. Let's see here. Alternate history of makings in 1914 is 2078. Yeah, that's way too long. Like, I think that my general outline is that if it takes more than 30 years, then you've reached a point where people who are being born that shouldn't exist or don't exist, and people who could have been born are no longer born because their parents didn't meet them. Like there's too much of a divergence, and then at that point you're just world building, which isn't bad. I like world building. I like lore just as much as I like history. That's why it's a really interesting way to like make fictional stuff. But yeah, it might be a little far. I'm not saying not to do it still. It could be pretty fun to do if you're enjoying it. Why stop, right? Is this a liberal America in the West? Yeah, but it doesn't mean that Savinkov couldn't start influencing some people's ideologies there. It doesn't need to be Huey Long style dictatorship in order for it to be nationalist. It could be several different forms or flavors that we could be doing here. Make Manchukuo Minjiang separate from the reorganized. I think that it would just be Russian, though. There'd be no Minjiang. By Manchukuo you mean Manchuria. In this context, there'd be no separate Manchuria, because that just isn't how it happens in Kaiserreich. It just wouldn't happen here either. Like it looks better on a map, but the entire legitimacy of the Chinese reorganized government comes from the fact that they had an entire region of China to themselves and then united China. If it that region got separated for some BS reason, then the legitimacy of the state would fall apart. And it's like, oh, but they need Manchuria for specifically resource extraction. Well, no, they don't. They're resource extracting the entire thing. And then instead of there being a Great Asia War like there is in TNO, there's just a mellowing. Maybe there's still a Great Asia War, but there definitely be some Maoistic communist insurrections being directly fed in from India over here. What about Chile and Argentina? Yeah, Argentina is stronger in Kaiserreich. I don't know. I don't know what to do here. I know that Argentina always fights Brazil, and if we want Brazil to continue to exist, maybe we do that weird thing where there's that, like, the Patagonia kingdom in the south. I know that can happen if you're an antagonist Brazil. That could be interesting, and it could immediately fall apart too. Christian socialists could exist. What do you mean? In what area? Japan and Kaiserreich has an easy time influencing China and Russia. Yeah. And the only way that they'd be able to succeed this much is if they abandoned their Russia stuff, which makes sense. They could do that. And then there could be some sort of agreement between Russia and Japan. That's the only way I can sort of see this thing going forward. South America may be a regional Cold War between the syndicalists, the Ugartist faction, and the Democrats of the Montevideo Treaty. I think I want to keep the monarchist Brazil, but I do want to see if we can have some socialist nations in South America, maybe in northern South America. Argentina and Chile could form a South American social. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Maybe. Yeah. Isn't there like that Andean republic that is like a really crazy path that if you manage to conquer all of formerly Spanish South America, then you can unify the tag? You could have something like that happen. Well, not the whole thing, but you know what I mean. Like you could have them have those ambitions. I think that's the play. Let's start making these notes down. So I know that one person wanted to see how I do things, and I guess I haven't really made any specific nations, so I'll do that right now. So what I do is I open a color scheme. This is Skaldagrim's regurgitated color key called Suck. You find an area in the world. We want to go to the Americas, Canada, US, Mexico, the Caribbean, Brazil. So then we go monarchist Brazil, or we do far right Brazil. Let's do far right Brazil. Then we go over here. I know that Brazil's borders are the same, or if they aren't different, then they are pretty similar. This is a administrative map of the world in, I think, 2020 or a little later. I used 220 to select an entire nation, but you can see here there's I think these are like native countries or settlements that are illustrated. So instead of using the administrative mode, I'll go down to a reference map. Here is 1950 by somebody in this area. I keep changing the value until I only select this nation here. You can see here that it's all these borders. The black borders are going to be made later. I alt-click to look at certain layers only. It's important to re-alt-click and then you get to see everything again. Now I selected a layer by control right-clicking. It shows everything here. It shows the folders. So this is the USA2 folder in the central region. We don't want to be doing over there, probably closer to Samankov. So then there's this huge list of things here. Then I make a new layer. I call it integ list Brazil. Sometimes you just call them Brazil. It's important to name each nation so that when you're looking at the file, you can do that, or if you're clicking on it, you can do that. And then there, fully done here. But then there's some areas that I missed here. So, or like some rivers I don't really want to have represented. I'll just deal with that later. But then you just make edits to this layer only. Now, in every folder here, in the assets folder, I have a stroke effect. I turn it off because it causes selection issues when you do it a certain way. But it makes the map look really pretty. The borders here exist. There's a little fade here, which is a little weird. That's why I don't tend to use this version where you have unoccupied lands or whatever this color code is. but it looks nice. It makes the rivers exist without it being land, but then there's problems like this here where there's a lake that doesn't exist, and you have to deal with that. And then there's a bleed prevent, which is just the seas and a black border, so that if you do here, you see how there's a bleed here, you turn that off by putting this on. So this blue layer overlays on this, and it makes it look really nice. So that's how I do it. I'm thinking of making a version of my Photoshop file where I have all the layers and all that stuff, and I just put it up for my members to download. If you guys are interested in that, let me know. And I would want it to be members only, because I don't want my like trade secrets just to go out for free, you know? And yeah, so if you guys are interested in that, let me know. But yeah, so we're going to have a monarchist integralist Brazil here. So you have this here, and then the South could be socialist, but then why would they, if there's a total war between them and then they fight? Maybe it makes sense Chile to do that. I don't know. Maybe it makes sense for the North to do that. I don't know. I think that Central America should be communist. So in order to keep talking to you guys before I go and do too much stuff on my own, do we want total? I mean, we kind of do, but I'm not sure. We could have this be communist, or sorry, socialist. So I'm making, I can't do this on this layer. I need to be doing it on the notes layer. Notes. And I'll be increasing this so it's easier to see. At least these people are socialists. Maybe this is a USA, Taiwan. Maybe not. I kind of prefer this being USA. USA. And then Mexico is always third international, so they will be too. But in what way, I'm not sure. I'm not too familiar with the paths that happen in here, but it could be interesting to have something going on here. These are former European territories, so I'll put Old World Alliance. It's a lot better than Alliance of Asses, so I'll put WA. Old World Alliance. So it's a good catch-all term. Don't know what's happening in the Caribbean at all, really. I do like the Totalist Indian Federation, or Indies Federation. I think that's pretty fun. Let's see what else is going here. Socialist Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina versus Brazilian Empire. I mean, maybe we just do it that way. Like, it's not necessarily a path in Kaiserreich, but it does make more sense for there to be a total war here. But then, there's too many socialists. This is where the split makes sense, where the USA just wants all the USA to be all the Americas to be under their sphere. All the Europeans are more pan-revolutionary, and it's like, well, why don't we just do this here, and then they can figure it out. There could be something here. It's like conflicting geopolitical things that could manifest, or maybe they don't. I'm not sure. No wholesome South America. Colombia and then mutually attack Entente for Guyana, and then make their own alliance. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So then they take this, maybe they take everything. But then Brazil, I think they also have claims here, don't they? So there could be a conflict between these things where there's like I want this land. No, I want this land. They fight here, and these are like more democratic. Maybe. It's sort of in the socialist American sphere of influence, though. But then it's like the lesser of two evils, because one of them doesn't even have any elections, and it's just Savinkovist, nationalist, republican monarchy. But there'll be a republic eventually. Pentagon. Okay. Argentina and Chile could form a South American socialist. Yes. Chart the Pentagon Workers' Front can form the Socialist Indonesia. Yeah. They have to be totalist. Yeah. Colombia, Panama, Ecuador, and Venezuela. Oh, and it's Panama too. So I'll change this here then. How do we feel about the German division here? I was thinking that the Czech Republic could be released instead of Czechoslovakia in order to increase buffer state status, but then when the socialists just start stepping on Russian toes to interfere with their sphere of influence, then the Czechoslovak movement becomes more prominent, and there could be a Czech civil war between pan-Slavics and independent socialist Republicans, then that could be interesting. I'm not entirely certain. Or we just have Czechoslovakia. I'm not sure. But what are we doing about this division? Are we having the Russians and the socialists split Germany down the Elbe? If they do, then that means that Russia gets the Kiel Canal. Does that make sense? How do we feel about that? Okay. What, the river idea with Kiel? I guess so. What else are we going to do here? Totalist India. Totalist India, and they're like this, and this, and then there's tension here. The borders are more like the whatever, you know what I mean. I just my notes. Somebody said that there should be a war between Burma, Thailand, and then somewhere else. I don't know what's happening in Indochina. They could either be socialist, or they could be Japanese, or they could be that weird path where you're a socialist revolt, but then you end up allying with Germany, with Japan. I kind of like that, because then it makes it a little more dynamic. Maybe Pakistan exists. I think that might make more sense for Pakistan to exist as a form of Russia starting to cause a problem rather than it happening beforehand, because it doesn't happen in Kaiserreich. And then the India rework, yeah, it was about to be released, but then it got pulled because the developer quit Hearts of Iron modding. And maybe other issues, I don't know. But so we can't go off of that. Maybe. I just kind of like the idea of a totalist India causing problems, and then there being a force to try to prevent that. Tibet would be an interesting buffer state in this case, because this is also Russian. We already talked about this being Iran, and Iran's like this, and then don't abbreviate the chiropract. Worst mistake of my life. And then there's this Syria, and then there's this Arabia, there's this here, there's this, and then, but then these people are friends against fighting these people. These people like each other. These people like each other. These people might not like each other. I think these people like each other though. But then these people like each other, and they're trying to fight this. And then Russia is like maybe doing this with them. And so is the International. Maybe. And then maybe this is Russia aligned and this isn't. And they're like a democratic nation in a nationalist versus socialist pond. And then totalist Albania being super bunkery is kind of funny. So we could have these people just be totalist. And then Greece, I have no idea what to do. So still not sure how to best manifest a conflict that is engaging in the Balkans yet, which is kind of crazy to say given how the Balkans are very oriented for that sort of thing. Just given history, right? Czech separatists inside the Austrian Diet, Second Hungarian Civil War. Sorry, I don't know about the Kaiserreich lore, but in real life, the idea of Slovakia included comes one from a Slovak general, Stefan, who proposed to Czech separatists inside the Austrian Diet in the Second Hungarian Soviet War. I'm not entirely certain what you mean, but I'll look into it. So you're talking about when the Hungarians had that revolt, there's the idea of having Czechs and Slovaks being separate. I'm not sure entirely. We'll see. Or them revolting against the Russians too. Is that what you mean? I don't know. Yeah, okay. I think I've yapped enough. I think there's a lot to go over. I might not be able to cover everything in the Krasnacht video. There'll be a lot to cover. And I will definitely focus on the core of the conflict of the Russians and the Third International, how to facilitate that, how to resolve the problems where Japan still exists, respecting other core aspects like a totalist India and a remnant of the Entente alliance, but how to make the Entente, or the old Entente alliance, actually interesting. Yeah, not entirely certain, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah, anybody else have anything to say? Oh wow, there's a huge burst of messages that I just only got now. Hi, Rewriting History. How are you doing? No idea what this map is about, but I think Switzerland should own all of Venice and Bavaria Trust. Well, you heard it here, guys. The alternate history YouTuber Rewriting History said that we need to do that, so we're going to have to do that. Hungarian Soviet Republic raging a war in Slovakia. Oh, so like when it was first having a problem and then they united because of that. I think, yeah, that makes sense. Make a second live stream. Yeah, maybe I will once I map this out more, or if I have a good enough idea, then I just won't need to consult with you guys. In this timeline, we're gonna have Brazil being integralist. And they invited the Czech army to conquer it. Oh, cool. Okay, that's interesting. Western Australia is cool. Yeah, not my idea though, but yeah, I do like the dynamic of having Western Australia be a problem for the Old World Alliance here. But there's a lot to do, a lot of African nations to map out. Morocco, I had no idea what to do with them. There were a German protectorate that would throw off the protectorate, so then they'd be anti-imperialist, maybe chiropract. We'll see. Switzerland is actually national populist. Yeah, I really like the Kaiserreich thing of having a nationalist Switzerland. I think it actually suits best in Kalterkrieg. So maybe if I do a video about Kalterkrieg, which is not a dead mod, but it would probably be in the format of the lore grave. So we'll have to see how that goes. But I do want I want there to be a nationalist Switzerland. There's a really interesting proxy conflict that can happen there. I can actually answer that Rewriting History mod question. I know that they rebranded to Rising Phoenix. Let me see if I'm in their thing here. It's Fallen Phoenix, and it's like based off of the Kaiser mod in its fundamental aspects, but then it's a little different. But I gotta wrap up the stream now. Kids are home and we gotta eat lunch. So thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in and all of your ideas. I'll be sure to review the chat more and credit people where necessary in order to make sure that your ideas are respected properly in the video itself. Yeah, thank you very much.